Members, we are here because we're problem solvers. We are here to solve the problems in healthcare, in education, agriculture, transportation. We're here to ensure that we are taking the very best care of all of the people that live in Minnesota. But unfortunately in Minnesota and across the nation, we have a really big problem. I want you to imagine that you are a young Native American girl, maybe 13 years old, or a young Native American woman. And your biggest problem should be going to the prom, what should I wear, or planning your future. But unfortunately, for so many of our Native American women, they're working really hard to stay alive by the time they reach their early 30s. This is a real issue. This is a true issue in our Native American communities across the United States, and unfortunately it's here in Minnesota as well. Because the facts are that for all of our mothers, our Native mothers, our aunts, our grandmas, our sisters, their girlfriends, murder is the third leading cause of death for Native American women aged 10 to 24. In some areas, Native American women are murdered at a rate 10 times the national average. And members, what's really hard is that Native American women are assaulted 2.5 to 3.5 times more than any other demographic of women. Native American women, girls, men, boys, and two-spirits, no one exactly knows how many that are victims of this, this violence. Nobody knows how many go missing across the nation or in Minnesota. We don't know how many are dead. This is a real historic endemic, and it is directly linked to a confusing jurisdictional maze, lack of resources, and unfortunately indifference in many areas. So I'm going to tell you about Jojo Boswell, and maybe some of you heard her sister's testimony in our committee. Jojo went missing in 2005. She was arrested in Hennepin County and taken to Owatonna. When she was released, she called her sister, and that was the last time her sister ever heard from her. On July 11th of that year, when she was released, she never made it back to Minneapolis, and we don't know why. Her sister Dolly reported her missing, but she was told she had to wait another 48 hours by the police. She waited those 48 hours, and it got all jammed up due to the discrepancies in the responsibility between the Owatonna and Minneapolis jurisdictional in the police force. Imagine hearing from a law enforcement when your loved one has gone missing to be told, call me when she returns home. Jojo never returned home. She's never been seen or heard from since that day. I'm going to tell you about Misty. Misty has been at every one of the committees to testify, and she's up in the balcony today. Misty was just 9 years old when she was first assaulted by the boyfriend of her foster mother. When she was 12 years old, she witnessed her grandmother being murdered in front of her, and then she watched her attacker go after her mother and then after her. Misty still has the scars on her hands as she defended herself. When she was 20 years old, she was kidnapped. She was taken over 60 miles from her home, and she was held against her will, was raped, but she finally got away. Misty is from Minnesota. Jojo is from Minnesota. Misty is continuing to fight for Indigenous rights today. And then I want you to remember Savanah Gray from Fargo, South Dakota. On August 19, 2017, Savanah went missing. She vanished without a trace. She was 8 months pregnant. We, the Native community, are very tightly connected when it comes to social media. We knew about her missing. We heard about it. We read the pleas to please find Savanah. But it was days before the media picked up on that. And they picked up not because it was a Native American girl that went missing, but here was a woman who was pregnant, who's gone missing. So, heartbreakingly, Savanah's body was discovered 8 days later, thrown in the Red River. It was 3 days after her 5-day-old daughter was found in an upstairs apartment building. Savanah's baby had been cut from her womb, kept by this family or this couple, and Savanah's body was just discarded into the river. Closer to home and most recently, Amber Christine Hopkins. I would be really curious to know if any of you have heard her name or if you know her story. Because this happened just this month in January 14th. And Amber was 5 months pregnant when she disappeared. And again, I wonder how many of you know this story. Her body was finally found on March 26th in the backyard of a vacant house in another part of the city from where she lived. I imagine that very few of you are familiar with these tragedies, but unfortunately it is the story that so many Native American families and communities understand so well. I can't tell you how many of these stories along the way that I have heard. Over a year ago, or last session, I introduced this bill with the help of some of our colleagues along on the other side of the aisle. And I so appreciated the support that all of you gave me and gave all of these victims and this bill as we've gone on. So we have an opportunity at long last to join an international discussion. It's not just local, it's just not national. This is an international issue centered on the disappearance and murders of Indigenous women. Members, we have an opportunity today to be a problem solver. With journalists and activists presenting alarming evidence that can no longer be ignored, I would ask you to join me in demanding accountability. In Minnesota, there are 7 Anishinaabe reservations and 4 Dakota communities. American Indians in Minnesota number approximately over 60,000 or 1.1% of Minnesota's total population. Yet the Urban Indian History Institute ranked Minnesota the 9th highest in the missing and murdered Indigenous women incidences. Research has found that 56% of Native women experience violence in their lifetime. In actuality, those predators of our Native women are not Native men. 9 out of 10 victims designate their assailants to be non-Native assaults. Men who will never be caught, will never be punished, who will continue to do it again and again because they know that Native American women are vulnerable, they're invisible, and they're afraid half the time to report the injustices that are done to them. We know of some of the reasons that so many missing and murdered Indigenous women's cases go unreported, uninvestigated, and unsolved, but we don't know how many women are actually missing or have been murdered. It is estimated that thousands of Native women have disappeared or been killed. And members, we owe it to our Native community. We owe it to this nation to recognize and address this historic trauma. So this bill, House File 70, is the very first step in understanding the significance of our missing and murdered Indigenous communities and bringing an end to this really, really, really horrific violence. It creates a task force to address the violence against Indigenous women, and it defines the standards and requirements of that task force. This task force will be responsible for examining and reporting ways to address the systematic causes behind the violence against Indigenous women. It appropriates methods for tracking and collecting data. It examines government policies and institutions that impact violence against Indigenous women. And it's going to recommend appropriate measures to address the violence and assist the victims and their 11 families. It will also include victims, survivors, Indian community members, and also those that have worked hard with eradicating this violence against women. It will also include membership from all 11 tribes. So we're trying to make the invisible visible. We don't want any more Native American families to worry and wonder if their loved ones will return home when they walk out the door. So members, I'm asking you to be problem solvers. I'm asking you to join me, and I know many of you had. I'm asking you to vote green.